The smell of food hit first. That was always how it started on the endless veil, before the noise of 100 eating creatures, before the scrape of chairs and the clatter of trays. There was the smell. 40 different species, 40 different ideas of what a meal was supposed to be. Burnt fat, sweet grain, something that smelled like wet soil after rain. Something else that smelled like nothing at all, which somehow made it worse. Divvy carried his tray through the middle of it all without looking at anyone. He found a seat near the far wall, which was where he always sat. Not because he was told to, not because anyone had assigned him a corner, but because the far wall had a viewport, and the viewport showed stars, and stars were quiet. He set his tray down and looked at what the ship's food system had put together for him. Roasted root vegetables, a bowl of lentil stew, thick and dark, 2 pieces of flatbread, slightly burnt on one edge, the way he liked them, a cup of black tea that he started eating that he had been on the endless veil for 22 days. His job was simple. He managed cargo intake, logged supply weights, flagged anything that came on board that did not match its manifest. It was the kind of work that required patience and a very good memory. DAV had both. He was not a soldier. He was not a diplomat. He was the man who made sure nobody accidentally brought contraband livestock onto a diplomatic cruiser, which had happened twice before he came aboard. Apparently that he was also, as far as anyone on the ship could tell, the only human in the fleet. That fact had gone mostly unremarked for the first 2 weeks. The Solundi crew members were polite in a way that people are polite when they have been trained to be careful, measured, never quite warm. The Vreki were different. They were not trained to be polite. They were trained to be effective, and politeness had never been part of that curriculum. There were 9 of them on board. A security unit assigned to protect the diplomatic officers during the patrol. They were large, larger than DAV by a significant margin, with broad shoulders, thick necks, and a texture to their skin that reminded him of old leather left out in the sun. They ate together always. They ate a great deal always. And they ate meat. Always. Their leader was named Orith. Orith was the kind of creature who filled a room without trying. Not because he was loud, though he could be, but because everything about him, the way he moved, the way he looked at things, the way he sat, communicated that he had decided a long time ago that the world would simply have to adjust to him. He had never been wrong about that. He noticed Dav's tray on the 14th day. Tea had taken that long because Orith sat at the opposite end of the mess hall, and he had not seen any reason to pay attention to the small, quiet human who always sat by the viewport. But on the 14th day, one of his soldiers had said something that made Orith look up, and he had followed the gesture, and he had seen the tray. Vegetables. Bread. Stew with no meat in it. He had said nothing then. He had simply looked and then looked away. But on this night, day 22, he did not look away. He picked up his own tray, still heavy with half-eaten cuts of something dense and dark red, and walked across the mess hall. His soldiers came with him without being asked. That was the thing about Vreki units. They moved like a tide. One moved, the rest followed, and by the time you noticed it was happening, you were already surrounded. DAV heard them coming. He did not look up, or stopped on the other side of the table. He looked down at the tray. He looked at the lentil stew. He looked at the flatbread. He looked at the roasted vegetables, which were slightly purple, which was a color he had never expected food to be. This is what Earth sends us, he said. Not to DAV, to his soldiers. He said the way a person reads a sign out loud. Not asking, not accusing, just stating. Letting the words do the work. Point 2 of the soldiers made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a grunt. One of them leaned over and sniffed the stew, then pulled back with an expression that left no room for interpretation. A plant eater, Orith said. Still not quite to DAV. Still not quite away from him either. They sent us a plant eater for a diplomatic patrol. DAV picked up his spoon and took a mouthful of stew. Tea was good stew. He had adjusted the recipe slightly on the 3rd day. More cumin, less salt. The food system had remembered. He appreciated that. Does it not bother you? One of the soldiers asked. This one was speaking to DAV directly, with the kind of curiosity that was mostly contempt wearing a thin disguise. To eat like something that cannot fight back. DAV chewed, swallowed, picked up a piece of flatbread. He did not answer. Orith watched him. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not respect, not yet, but something adjacent to it. Confusion, maybe, or the beginning of a question he had not figured out how to ask. The soldiers laughed again, louder this time, filling the mess hall with noise. A few Salundi officers looked over from their tables, then looked away just as quickly. Nobody intervened. Nobody was sure what intervention would even look like. DAV finished his stew. He finished his bread. He drank his tea, slowly, watching the stars through the viewport. Then he picked up his tray, stood up, nodded once at Orith. Not an apology, not in deference, just an acknowledgement, the way you nod at weather, and walked back to the food return station. Orith stood there for a moment after he left, looking at the empty space where the human had been sitting. The stew bowl was completely cleaned. He did not know why that bothered him. But it did. Russ found him in the cargo bay. Not because she had gone looking, or at least, that was what she told herself. She had simply needed to check something on the lower deck, and the lower deck happened to contain the cargo bay, and the cargo bay happened to contain DAV, sitting on a supply crate with a data tablet in his lap and a half-eaten apple in his hand. She stopped in the doorway. "You eat that here? Alone?" "Better light," he said, which was not true. The cargo bay lighting was yellow and slightly uneven. But she did not argue with it. Russ was Salundi, which meant she was thin in the way that tall structures are thin. Not fragile, just built differently. Her skin had a faint blue-gray cast to it, and her eyes were a pale silver that made her look like she was always slightly startled, even when she was not. She was a junior diplomatic officer, which was a title that mostly meant she handled the paperwork that the senior diplomats did not want to look at. She was very good at it. She was also, right now, the only person on the ship who felt bad about what had happened in the mess hall. "I wanted to apologize," she said. "For Orith. For his unit." DAV looked up at her. He had a calm face. Not blank, just settled, like a lake that had decided not to have waves today. "You don't need to," he said. "It wasn't your doing." "No," she said. But I sat there and said nothing, which felt worse afterward. He considered that for a moment, then nodded, which seemed to mean he accepted that as a reasonable thing to say. He took a bite of the apple. Russ found herself looking at the apple, then at the tablet on his knee, which showed cargo weight logs, then back at his face. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You're already here," he said, which she decided meant yes. She sat down on the crate across from him. It was less comfortable than it looked, but she didn't move. "Why do you eat that way?" "Only plants." "Only." She gestured at the apple. "This." He looked at the apple. "Because I want to," he said. "But you could eat meat." "Yes." "You're built for it," she said. "I read the briefing on human biology before the mission. You're a classified omnivore. You have the teeth for it, the stomach acid. I know what I'm built for," he said. Not sharply, just as a fact. Russ paused. She was used to conversations going in directions she expected. This one kept taking small turns she hadn't prepared for. Then why choose not to? He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of someone who doesn't know what to say. The quiet of someone deciding how much to say. "I grew up in a fishing village," he said finally, "on the coast of Norway. That's a country on Earth, cold, a lot of water, a lot of fish." He took another bite of the apple. "I caught my first fish when I was 5. My grandfather helped me. By 7, I was gutting them myself. By 10, I could read a river, where the fish would be, what time of day, what they were eating. I spent half my childhood waist-deep in cold water." Russ listened. She had not expected a childhood story. She found, to her surprise, that she wanted to hear it. "I ate fish until I was 23, DAV continued. "Then I stopped. Not because I forgot how. Not because I lost the taste for it. I stopped because I decided I didn't need it anymore. I had enough. I knew how to get more, if I ever didn't. But I didn't need to take something's life to prove that." He finished the apple and set the core down beside him. "Orith thinks I eat vegetables because I can't do anything else," he said. "He thinks the food on my tray is a limit, a ceiling, something I'm stuck beneath. And it isn't," Russ said. It came out slower than she meant it to, like something clicking into place. "It's a floor," DAV said. "I eat this way because I can afford to. Because I know if everything changed tomorrow, if this ship went dark and we were stranded somewhere with nothing, I would not starve. He looked at her with that calm, still face. I've already proved that to myself. A long time ago, in a cold river, when I was 10 years old. Russ did not say anything for a while. Outside the cargo bay, the ship hummed. The sound of it was low and constant, the sound of something very large moving through empty space without effort. She had been on ships her whole career and had mostly stopped hearing it. But right now she heard it. The Vreki would not understand that, she said finally. No, DAV agreed. It would take something, a demonstration, maybe for them to even begin to. She wasn't sure why she said it. It was the kind of thing you said when you were thinking out loud and forgot there was someone else in the room. DAV picked up his data tablet again and went back to his cargo logs. Maybe, he said. Russ sat there for another minute, listening to the ship. Then she stood up, nodded, and walked back toward the upper decks. She was halfway up the corridor before she realized that the entire conversation had felt less like talking to a colleague and more like reading something important, the kind of document you know you'll need to come back to later. Once you've had time to understand what it was actually saying, she made a note to come back to it. The planet had no proper name. The traders who stopped there called it Vel, short for something in a language that 3 of the 4 species who used it could not actually pronounce. It was a frontier world, mostly water, with wide flat land masses cut through by river systems so dense they looked, from orbit, like cracks in old pottery. The outpost sat on the edge of one of those rivers. It had been there for 40 years and looked like it. The endless veil docked for resupply and crew rotation. Shore leave was 6 hours. Most of the crew took it. The outpost market was the kind of place that had evolved rather than been built, a long stretch of stalls and lean-to structures that started at the dock and followed the river for about half a kilometer before just sort of stopping, the way rivers stop, without announcement. It sold everything. Fuel cells and fabric and dried spices and live animals in cages stacked 4 high and things DAV could not name and did not try to. He walked through it slowly, not buying anything, just looking. The air smelled like river water and smoke and something sweet he couldn't place. The sky above Vel was a color that wasn't quite blue and wasn't quite green, a pale, washed-out shade that made everything look slightly underlit, like the planet itself had forgotten to turn the brightness all the way up. The river beside the market ran fast and clear over pale stones. DAV could see the bottom in most places. He could also see the fish. He slowed down. They were large. A meter long, some of them, maybe more. Silver-scaled, with a slight orange tint along the belly, built wide through the middle and narrow at the tail. They moved the way all river fish move, against the current, instinctively, all the time, but they moved with a heaviness that told him they were well-fed. Fat fish, deep water nearby, probably. With plenty to eat, he stood at the edge of the market and watched them for a while. He didn't notice Orith until he heard the voice. The plant eater has found the fish section. It wasn't loud. That was the thing about Orith. He never needed to be loud. He had a voice that carried the way heavy things carry, by weight rather than volume. 3 of his soldiers were with him, already holding food from one of the meat stalls, dark, thick slabs of something wrapped in broad leaves. Davy looked at him, then back at the river. I imagine you don't know what to do with them, Orith said. He walked closer, stopping beside DAV at the river's edge. He looked down at the fish with the comfortable ease of a predator who has never doubted his place in any food chain. These are good eating, but you need to catch them first. And then you need to... He made a gesture, a short cutting motion, and smiled in the way Vreki smiled, which was mostly teeth. Well, you need to do things I don't think your kind has the stomach for. One of the soldiers laughed. Another one said something in Vreki that Dav's translation ship rendered as "let him try," with an undertone that suggested this was being said for the joke of it, not the possibility. Davy looked at the river for another moment. Then he took off his jacket. He folded it, set it on a dry rock beside the bank, and rolled his sleeves up past the elbow. His arms were not impressive looking. He was not a large man. He had the build of someone who had done a great deal of physical work over a long time. Lean rather than broad, with the kind of quiet density that doesn't announce itself, he stepped into the river. The water came up to his knees immediately, and he could see from the way he steadied himself that the current was strong. The stones underfoot were slick. He moved carefully, Not slowly, not hesitantly. Carefully, the way you move when you know what you're doing and you also know that the river doesn't care. Orith had stopped smiling. He was watching. DAV waited about 4 meters out to where a cluster of larger stones broke the current into a small, quiet pool. The fish were there. He could see 2 of them holding position in the calm water, noses into the current, not yet aware of him. He stopped moving. He stood completely still. One of the soldiers behind Orith said something. Orith raised one hand, and the soldier went quiet. Divvy stood in the river without moving for a long time. Long enough that a vendor at a nearby stall glanced over. Long enough that Russ, who had been browsing a fabric stall 30 meters away and had noticed the small crowd forming at the river's edge, drifted closer to see what was happening. Then Divvy moved. That IT was fast, faster than anyone watching expected from a man who had been so still. His hands went into the water and came back out in one motion. And when they came back up, they brought the fish with them, both hands under its belly, thumbs locked over the gills, the creature thrashing hard and sending water across everyone standing nearby. Davy held IT. That IT was enormous. Nearly a meter of fish, all muscle, pulling against his grip with everything it had. He held it without straining, without stumbling, feet planted wide on the riverbed, both arms absorbing the weight. He stood there in the water and looked at it. The market had gone quiet around them. Not completely. There were still sounds. There are always sounds in a market, but the people nearby had stopped talking. Several were staring. The Vreki soldiers had stopped eating. Orith said nothing. The fish kept pulling. DAV kept holding. And from away he looked at it. Not triumphant, not hungry, just very calm and very present. It was impossible to tell, yet, what he intended to do next. Nobody in the market moved. DAV stood in the river with the fish in both hands, water running down his arms and dripping off his elbows, and he looked at it the way you look at something you have looked at many times before, not with excitement, not with hunger, just with the clear and level attention of someone who knows exactly what they are holding. The fish was still fighting. It was a strong animal. Its tail threw arcs of cold water across the stones, and the muscles in its body were working hard. And if DAV felt the effort of holding it, he gave no sign. Orith stood at the bank. His arms were crossed. His expression had moved from amusement through surprise and was now somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that didn't have a clear name, yet one of his soldiers whispered something. Orith didn't respond. DAV adjusted his grip slightly. He brought the fish closer to him, angling it in the way a person angles something when they are about to do something specific with it. He turned his head slightly to the right, and then he bit into the side of the fish, clean and direct, teeth breaking the skin just behind the gills into the thick muscle of the upper body that he chewed, that he swallowed. There was no performance in it. No looking up to see who was watching, no widening of the eyes, no display. He bit the fish the way a man bites into a piece of bread he baked himself, with the automatic ease of someone who has done this exact thing many times and does not find it remarkable. The fish struggled harder for a moment, then less. DAV held it steady through all of it. Then he crouched, slowly, carefully, knees bending until his hands were at the water's surface, and he opened his grip. The fish held still for a moment, stunned. Then it found the current, turned its body against it, and was gone. Back into the deeper water, back into the dark between the stones, alive and moving and gone. DAV straightened up. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked at his palms for a moment, then rinsed them in the river, shook the water off, and waded back to the bank. He picked up his jacket from the rock. He shook it out. He put it back on. Nobody said anything. Not the market vendors who had stopped to watch. Not the 2 Salundi officers who had wandered over at some point and were now standing near Russ with expressions that suggested they were reconsidering something. Not Orith's soldiers, who had been mid-conversation about something entirely unrelated when this started and had completely forgotten what it was. Not Orith. Orith was looking at DAV with an expression that Russ, standing at a slight angle, could see clearly. She had seen many expressions on Vreki faces in her years of diplomatic work. Contempt she knew. Challenge she knew. The specific kind of boredom that Vreki expressed when they were being polite by force. She knew that one very well. But this was different. This was the face of a creature who had a map of the world in their head. A map they had trusted their whole life and had just noticed a landmark in the wrong place. Not fear, not admiration, just the quiet, disorienting sense of having been wrong about something without knowing yet what the right thing was. Davy rolled his sleeves back down. He looked at Orith, not with challenge. He never seemed to look at anything with challenge, which was its own kind of unsettling rest thought. He looked at him the way you look at a person when you want them to know you see them. Just that. Good fish, he said. Then he turned and walked up the bank toward the market, passing Russ without stopping, though she thought she saw something in his face as he went by. Not a smile exactly, but the shape of one, the implication of one, the kind of expression that lives in the muscles around the eyes rather than in the mouth. Russ looked back at Orith. He was still standing at the water's edge, still looking at the river, at the place where the fish had disappeared. His soldiers were waiting for him to say something. He didn't. She understood, in that moment, what DAV had actually done. It was not what she had expected. She had expected, if she was honest, some kind of proof of toughness. A display. A moment built for the audience. The kind of thing that invites a response, that opens a conversation by force. This wasn't that. He had caught the fish. He had taken one bite, and then he had let it go. And the letting go was the thing that sat in the chest differently than the catching did, the thing that you couldn't quite argue with because it wasn't an argument. It was just a man with a full stomach standing in a river, making a choice because he could. The market slowly came back to life around them. Sounds returned. People remembered what they had been doing. Orith turned from the river and walked away without speaking, and his soldiers followed him, and none of them finished the food they had been holding. Word travels fast on a small ship. That by the time the endless veil had left Vel's orbit and resumed patrol, everyone on board knew what had happened at the river market. Not all of them knew the details correctly. The fish had grown in some tellings, and in at least one version DAV had caught two of them simultaneously, which was not true, but the core of it was intact. The human had gone into the water. The human had caught a fish barehanded. The human had bitten it and then released it. Nobody could quite agree on what to make of that last part. The Vreki soldiers were quieter than usual at dinner that evening. They still ate together, still ate meat, still took up more space than they needed. But the running commentary about the rest of the crew, which had been a nightly feature of the mess hall since the patrol began, was absent. They ate with their heads down, the kind of quiet that settles over a group when something has shifted and everyone feels it, but nobody has named it yet. Davy ate by the viewport. Lentil stew, as usual. He did not appear to be thinking about anything in particular. IT was 3 hours after dinner when Orith came to find him. The ship's common corridor on the lower deck was empty at that hour. DAV was walking it slowly, which was something he did when he couldn't sleep. Not because he needed to go anywhere, just because movement helped. Orith came from the opposite direction, and for a moment they both stopped, about 4 meters apart, and looked at each other. "I want to ask you something," Orith said. "All right," said Davy. Orith did not look comfortable, which was itself remarkable, because Orith looked comfortable in every situation DAV had observed him in. He looked like a creature built specifically to be comfortable, to take up his space without apology, to stand in any room and feel like he belonged there more than the room did. But right now, he looked like a person holding a question they had not wanted to have. "Why did you let it go?" Orith asked. DAV considered the question, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was deciding how to give it. "My grandfather fished the same stretch of river for 60 years, he said. Same water, same stones, same fish, or their children, their grandchildren, the same fish in the way that rivers stay the same, even when the water changes." He leaned against the corridor wall. He had a habit. Every morning, the first fish he caught, he put back. Didn't matter how big. Didn't matter what the catch looked like after that. First one always went back. Orith said nothing. He was listening the way Vreki listened when they chose to, completely, with the full weight of their attention, which was a different thing from the polite half-listening that most species did. I asked him why once. DAV continued. "I was probably 8 years old. He told me, if you can take it and you don't, it means you'll never go hungry. not as a superstition, not as a ritual, just as a fact. If you're the kind of creature who can choose, if you have enough control, enough patience, enough skill, then food will always be available to you. You've already proved you can get it. You don't need to take every chance you get. He paused. The fish I let go today, he said, wasn't feeding me. It was reminding me that I don't need it to. Orth was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the ship's ventilation system cycled through one full turn, which DAV had learned happened every 4 minutes. Among my people, Orth said slowly, what you have, you take. What you can kill, you kill. Because if you don't, something else will. The world does not hold things in reserve for you. It only gives when you are strong enough to take. I know, DAV said. That's a reasonable way to live. It kept your people alive for a long time. But not yours. Ours too, DAV said. For most of our history, we were the same. Take what you can, kill what you must, move before the season ends. He looked at Orth. We still have it in us. It doesn't go away. I proved that today. I proved I still know exactly how to be that creature. He turned slightly, looking down the empty corridor. I just don't have to be. Something moved in Orth's face. It wasn't easy to see. Vreki features were not built for the kind of small expressions humans used, but it was there. The slight easing of something held very tight. You're not what I thought you were, Orth said. Not as an apology. Not even quite as a compliment. More like someone correcting a map. Acknowledging an error not because it hurt to make the error, but because accuracy mattered more than pride. No, DAV agreed simply. Orth reached into the front of his jacket and produced a flat metal flask, dull and scratched in the way that things get scratched when they're carried everywhere for a long time. He held it out. DAV took it. He drank. It was strong, warm going down, sharp at the back of the throat. He handed it back. Orth drank. He recapped the flask and put it away. What do your people call it? He asked. The thing your grandfather did. The letting go. DAV thought about it. There's no single word, he said. We might call it discipline, or restraint, or just knowing you're going to be okay. Orth nodded once. It was slow and deliberate, the nod of someone filing something away carefully. We have no word for it either, he said. Not in our language. He turned and walked back down the corridor without another word, and DAV listened to his footsteps fade and then disappear into the hum of the ship. He stood in the corridor a while longer, then continued his walk. The ship moved through the dark. Outside the hull, stars that had no names yet slid past in silence. The patrol ended 40 days after it began, with no major incidents, 3 minor trade disputes successfully mediated, and 1 navigational error that added 6 hours to the return journey, in which the ship's pilot spent a great deal of effort explaining to anyone who would listen. The diplomatic outcome was officially described as positive. The report filed by the senior Salundi officer used words like productive and constructive and building toward a framework. These were the words diplomatic reports always used, which meant they described the shape of a thing without quite touching it. What the report did not mention was the negotiation session on the 38th day, when a trade disagreement between 2 of the contacted worlds had sharpened into something that was not quite an argument, but was heading there. The Salundi officers had been carefully neutral, which was their job. The Vreki security unit had been positioned at the perimeter, which was there to a certain point. One of the contacted parties, a species called the Muvek, who were large and loud and accustomed to being both, had looked at the human sitting quietly in the corner with his data tablet and asked, with deliberate dismissal, why a plant eater had been brought to a serious table. Orth had looked up from the perimeter. He had not moved. He had not needed to, because, he said, across the full length of the room, in a voice that everyone heard and no one interrupted, he is not a plant eater. He is something we do not have a name for yet, and you would do well to take his presence seriously. The room had gone quiet. The Muvek representatives had looked at Orth, at his unit, at the way they were standing, at the fact that they were not making this statement as a threat, but simply as a correction, and had recalibrated the way most creatures recalibrate when a Vreki warrior tells them they are wrong about something. The negotiation had continued. It had gone well. DAV, for his part, had not looked up from his tablet. He filed a routine cargo report on the return journey. He noted 2 crates of Vel-origin dried goods that had been miscategorized on intake. He flagged a weight discrepancy in storage bay, for that turned out to be a box of personal items someone had forgotten to declare. He ate his meals by the viewport. He slept 7 hours a night. He was, by any external measure, exactly the same person he had been 40 days ago that he arrived back on Earth on a Thursday that he took a transport north. He had a small house near the coast, on the edge of a town that mostly survived on fishing and the people who came to watch other people fish. The house was cold when he arrived. He had been gone too long for the heating to have held, but it warmed up quickly once he switched it on. He put his bag down. He went to the kitchen and started making vegetable stew. Outside the window, the sea was gray and moving. The wind came off the water the way it always did in this part of the world. Not violently, just with a certain firmness, the way old things remind you they are still there. He could hear it while the stew cooked. He could smell the salt through the edges of the window frame that he ate at the kitchen table with a book he had been trying to finish for 3 months. He did not think about Orth. He did not think about the fish or the market or the negotiation on the 38th day. He thought about the stew, which needed slightly more pepper next time, and about the chapter he was on, which was getting better. He was asleep by 10.3 weeks later. Russ submitted her mission cultural notes to the Galactic Species Registry, a database maintained by the Salundi Diplomatic Service that collected behavioral and sociological data on all known sentient species. It was thorough if dry. Most entries ran to several thousand words and were read by a very small number of people. Her entry on humans was shorter than most. She had debated the length. In the end, she decided that the thing she was trying to say did not need space. It needed precision. She wrote, "Humans are classified omnivores who frequently and deliberately choose not to consume animal matter. This is not a dietary condition, a cultural restriction, or a biological limitation. It is a philosophy, specifically the philosophy of a predator that has already proved its capability and no longer requires the proof. Their restraint is not weakness. It is the confidence of something that knows it will never go hungry. We recommend all species briefings be updated accordingly. Treat the vegan human with the same caution you would extend to any apex creature. The choice not to hunt does not mean the inability to." She submitted it on a quiet afternoon and went back to her other work. The entry was reviewed and approved within the standard 48-hour window. It was filed under Homo sapiens, behavioral addenda, and cross-referenced with dietary classifications, predator psychology, and, at the suggestion of the reviewer, who had apparently also been on a mission with humans at some point, a new subcategory that had been created specifically for this entry. The subcategory was titled, "Restraint as Threat Display," on the coast of Norway. DAV woke up early, made tea, and stood at the window watching the sea. There was a river not far from the house. He could walk to it in 12 minutes. He knew where the fish would be at this hour. He knew how the current moved over the flat stones of the bend, where the deep water started, what the fish were likely eating. He drank his tea. He did not go to the river. He had no reason to. And that, as his grandfather had said a very long time ago in a voice that smelled like cold water and would smoke, was the whole point.